Hello, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We are ready to begin. Today's webinar is eligible for one contact hour. Sigma Theta Tau International Honor Society of Nursing is accredited as a provider of nursing continuing professional development by the American Nurses Credentialing Center's Commission on Accreditation. The speakers and planning committee members have disclosed no relevant financial relationships. To receive contact hours for this NCPD session, participants are required to attend the webinar and log into our LMS to complete an evaluation form. Information on how to access this will be emailed to all attendees approximately 1 week after the webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available via the Sigma repository within a few business days of recording. Following the presentations, we will have time for a question and answer session. You'll see on your GoToWebinar control panel that you can send a message through the questions feature. This is where you can type in any question you'd like to pose to the presenters. Be sure to hit send so that the message makes it to us. We would like to thank our speakers for sharing their expertise with us today. Our speakers today are Dr. Sarah Gray and Linda Anders. Dr. Sarah Gray is the Sigma Theta Tau International Chief Nursing Officer. She develops continuing education programs, events, and opportunities for the global nursing community. Sarah is an author, coach, and has spoken around the world equipping healthcare providers. Linda Anders is a strong healthcare services professional with an MBA and MSN focused in health, healthcare, administration management, and currently enrolled in a Doctor of Nursing Practice program with a minor in nursing leadership and innovation and a certificate in global public health. Linda works at Sigma as the Nursing Education Programming Manager and is board certified in the nursing professional development. Linda has been recognized as a leader in the profession by receiving the 100 Great Iowa Nurse Award and the 40 Under 40 Emerging Nurse Leader Award in the state of Illinois. Now let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation.
Thank you so much, Megan, for introducing us and such a lovely introduction. Sarah and I are so grateful to be here with all of you today to share this wonderful information and help you provide excellent education. Excuse me, I do want to apologize. Both Sarah and I have a very froggy throat this morning, so please bear with us as we don't sound as we normally do. We're going to share information with you today to plan your educational activities, along with providing a few updates from the ANCC guidelines that will be in place in July 2022. We want to also thank the North American Regional Councils as they asked for this information, and we want to make sure that you know, as members of Sigma Theta Tau International, that we are listening to you and we heard you, and you're helping guide the information and the webinars and the podcasts and all of the things that we do here at Sigma. So we want to thank you for that. As we move along in the presentation, I want to talk about our learning outcomes. At the end of the program, we hope that at least 80% of our learners today will report an increased knowledge or even validated current best practice in nursing education planning. So we're going to interact with you today via polls. We want to have interaction with you. We want to engage with you through the questions feature. So please feel free to ask questions. Sarah and I will dialogue at the end with you in regards to your questions. And we're really excited to connect with you, even though it's just through a webinar instead of in person. So our first poll is on the next slide. So Megan, if you could help us with the polling feature, we want you to rate your knowledge. So right now, how do you feel on how much do you know about planning a continuing education event that offers contact hours? Do you feel like you know it and you can do it with ease? You're amazing and you got it under control. You feel pretty knowledgeable. Maybe you're okay, but kind of struggle, or all the way down to you've never done it before, and that's okay too. Whatever you feel you're at right now is completely okay, because we want your honest feedback. So we'll give you just a minute to answer that. And Megan, when it looks like we have a decent number of participants that have answered, if you could show the results. Wow, this is great. That most of you have never done it before, 40%. That's really going to help us guide how we present the information to you today. And then we also have the next highest percentage of I'm okay but struggle with certain parts. So hopefully at the end of this presentation, you'll feel a little bit better with the content in which we're going to give you. So with that being said, after realizing, we do have an opportunity for improvement to help you understand the process a little bit better, we're going to dive right on into the content. And I apologize, there's a delay in advancing our slides. So once the slide gets to the next slide, we'll go ahead and continue. But as a planner for education, it is essential that we ensure content is valid, along with prevention of commercial bias in marketing and accredited continuing education according to the standards. So here we have the content integrity standards, the conflict of interest, along with commercial interest. So the potential for conflict of interest exists when an individual has the ability to control or influence the content of the educational activity and has financial relationship with a commercial interest, the products or services of which are pertinent to the content of the educational activity. Commercial interest, as defined by ANCC, is any entity producing, marketing, reselling, or distributing healthcare goods or services consumed by or used on patients. If the organization is owned or controlled by an organization or person that produces, markets, resells, or distributes healthcare goods consumed by or used on patients. Advocates for use of the products and services of commercial organizations. Here at Sigma, we actually have a slide, which you saw at the beginning of our webinar, that contains the information related to this. And so each webinar, thank you, Megan, has this slide where we talk about how we attest to no relevant financial relationships. And later on in this presentation, Sarah's actually going to talk about what to do if you do have a relevant financial relationship and how to resolve that. So conflict of interest, it can be outlined by both elements being present: ability to control or influence the content and the financial relationship, like I just said in the previous slide. Employees of a commercial interest are permitted to serve as planners, speakers, presenters, or authors and/or content reviewers if the content of the activity is not related to the products of the commercial interest. So with the 2022 update in July, ANCC is actually going to alter the terminology of conflict of interest to relevant financial information, or relevant financial relationships, excuse me. Relevant financial relationships align with the new standards, and ANCC is encouraging organizations to move away from that terminology and adapt the new term of relevant financial relationship. The accredited provider is responsible for identifying these relevant financial relationships between individuals in control of the educational content and ineligible companies in managing these to ensure that they do not introduce any commercial bias into the education that we discussed on the last slide. So I'm going to hand it over to Sarah to talk about the evaluation of such.
Thanks, Linda. So commercial interest certainly can be a little bit confusing, but I think if we can simplify it and bring it down to the simple terms of it's consumed or used on patients, if you take away all of the other words, that is really the key here. Is something consumed or used on patients? Is that entity providing those types of goods or services. If the organization is owned or controlled by an organization that is doing those things, that they're producing goods or services that are used on patients, that could also be considered a conflict or a commercial interest. And then relationship with that commercial interest exists, but it could be not relevant to the activity. So for example, if you have a company that makes bedpans, for example, but they're talking about leadership or they're sponsoring a leadership presentation, then there's no conflict or commercial interest there. Or they have a different topic. So they can talk about other things besides their actual products or things that are used on patients. There is a relevant relationship with a commercial interest exists. So if there is a relationship there, then a resolution is required. So we'll talk about that. The next slide, please. A few things that you could do in order to resolve this. So you could remove them completely from the activity. So that's obviously the first option. It may not be the best option for you as you move forward with your planning. You could revise their role so that they are no longer in a capacity to influence what the activity is about. Or you could not award contact hours for that particular portion of the activity, or you may have a content reviewer. So if you've ever been to a Sigma conference, we have moderators. That's how we utilize them. So we have someone that's reviewing that content for potential bias and balance in that presentation so that they can monitor the activity and address it as well. So the relevant financial relationship form should be completed, obviously, when there is someone on the planning committee that could have a potential. It doesn't hurt to overdo it, but we also don't want you to do unnecessary paperwork. So it's certainly, the form is not needed if the topic is not related in any way, like the example that I gave about the bedpans and leadership topic. And it could be a plethora of other ones, and we are always happy to help answer those, as is ANCC directly. Even though Sigma is not a provider or a approver for your activities, we're certainly still happy to answer any questions related to any chapter activities that you may be doing or regional activities that you may be doing in order to help you progress along in your planning process. So I'll turn it back over to you, Linda.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And I have to be honest and transparent and say Sarah has helped me greatly to understand the process of planning high quality education. And so please, like she said, reach out. We are more than willing to help guide you along the way. And with that being said, the planning committee. So who is on your planning committee and what does that look like? A minimum of 2 people is required, and there's really no maximum number of people, but we do want you to consider greatly who's contributing and actually doing the work of the planning. So of course, just like Sarah said, we don't want you to do unnecessary paperwork, but we also don't want you to have unnecessary members on your planning committee if they're not bringing something to the table. So we do have some roles here. We have the nurse planner, which is helping along with the educational content. So I do want to make mention, however, the 2022 ANCC update does say that the lead nurse planner, which is what we've called it in the past, has a new role title. So it's the same work, and that's outlined very well by ANCC. It's just the title is changing. The lead nurse planner's new role title is Accredited Provider Program Director. So it's a little bit longer. I'll say that again. Accredited Provider Program Director. So I just want to make sure that we articulate that clearly. And then, of course, on your planning committee, you have your content experts. So these are the people that are coming to the table with the knowledge about the subject and that are going to provide the content. And then anyone else that you feel might be important to have along the way on your planning committee. And then Sarah's going to talk about your different types of educational activities.
I think sometimes these words can get a little bit, well, wordy, to be frank. So let's break these down a little bit. So provider directed, provider paced. What does that actually mean? So that means that I, as a provider, am giving you education and I'm going to tell you how long you have to do it. That means I'm doing everything. So it could be like a live program, like a conference. That would be provider directed, provider paced. Okay. So I'm determining how long you will sit in an education session, the length of time that the education will occur. Then there's provider directed. So I'm still providing it to you, but you get to decide how long that you're going to stay. So like a recorded webinar or an online module. So you can pick those up or you can walk away, maybe, go get a snack or lunch in between times and come right back to it, but you get to decide. It could also be independent study. So those are all examples of provider directed, but the learner gets to decide the pace. Then there's blended, where there's live and learner pace. So this includes having to complete maybe a module prior to class or having an assignment to complete after the live class or both. So it could be a blended activity of sorts. And I'm sure you probably have done all three of these in your lifetime as a nurse, but maybe just didn't know the language that you were, ANCC was using for those. So if you, again, have any questions about those, please let us know. Additionally, we're going to talk about the gap analysis. This sometimes can be really elusive to people as well. The gap analysis is when you look at what the actual need is. And I will ask just a simple question of, do you send out a learning needs assessment to your membership base? So whether that be your chapter, your region, whatever level you're at, are you doing that on a regular basis? The reason why we ask that is, that is something that you should be doing just to gauge the assessment, just to gauge the learning needs of that group. It could be as simple as one question: what are the learning needs? And you could have a list of 3 topics for people to rank, or just 3 holes for people to write things in. I think it's a little bit easier when you give people something to choose from rather than a blank slate, so that you can get a little bit more aggregated information. You could also have a blank section for them to write things in, but doing just a simple 1-question survey is a learning needs assessment. So that does qualify as that. But let's dive into this gap analysis and needs assessment a little bit more. So when we provide education, it needs to be purposeful, it needs to meet a need, and we need to determine what that is. So it's the gap is where you're at now, the current state, versus where you want to be, the future state, okay? So there are 3 different types of gap. There's knowledge knows, so it's something that you don't know. Skill, something doesn't know how, or someone doesn't know how, I should say. And practice, does not do in practice. So there's a gap somewhere within those 3 things, because sometimes we know the right answer, but maybe we can't actually do it in practice setting, or maybe it's not getting done in the practice setting. Certainly by addressing the gap, you'll show improvements in the different areas. So maybe if it's knowledge, the learner will understand that topic or subject area more. And if it's skill, the learner is able to apply that knowledge and skill, maybe in even a simulated environment. And then practice, they'll actually be able to translate that into their clinical setting or into their practice setting, maybe in academia, depending on where it is. Certainly we want to lean into that gap, and we wanted to have a slide where we put the language all on one slide so that you could kind of understand how it all fits together. So obviously you're considering your audience and the gap, and also how you're going to deliver it. So to circle back from those types of activities, for knowledge, maybe if it's something they just don't know how to do, maybe a lecture like this or a webinar like this would be sufficient, and it could be a live, blended, learner pace type of activity. Could be any of those things. To make it a blended learning activity, we could actually have you submit a form to us where you will have had to have filled out the activity form after this. That would make it a blended learning activity. Otherwise, this is just a provider-paced learner provider, learner-based activity. Thank you. The skill, maybe this is live. Maybe you would, go through, it could be in person or it could be remote. And I think sometimes we get a little hung up on the skill and the practice, thinking that it can't be, but it certainly could with certain topics. It could be done with a return demonstration or with someone observing and evaluating. And with practice, it could be done as live, blended, learner paced, but we certainly want to consider how it's going to be evaluated. Generally, it could be done better in an actual hospital or clinic or academic-based environment so that a change in practice can be measured over time. So that's something that you could work with someone on as well. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Linda, who's been doing a great job with outcomes versus objectives.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, and thank you, Sarah, for that, because when I first came to Sigma about 9 months ago, I was really struggling with understanding the difference between an outcome and an objective, and I was having a hard time wrapping my mind around it. And actually, as we were preparing for this presentation, it finally, I feel like all clicked when I reviewed the content and when I was putting it together. So I truly hope that this will help clarify some of it for you if you're struggling like I was. So let's talk about outcome versus objective. So outcome, what you expect your learner to know or be able to do as a result of the activity. This is more learner-centric. It's measurable, so how students know that they've achieved the objective. In other words, let's look at a learning outcome describes the overall purpose or goal from participation in the educational activity. And we're going to go through some examples, and we're going to apply this so that we can actually see what and how to apply this and make our education that high quality level that we want. So let's compare that to an objective, which are used to organize specific topics and achieve an overall learning outcome. So remember that the learning outcome is reflective of the desired state. So of objective, excuse me, I think I misspoke for a minute, but use the organize specific topics to achieve an overall learning outcome. May include tasks such as list, discuss, or state. Those are very basic on the learning objectives when you use words like list or state. There's not a lot of depth in those. What you are wanting them to learn. So if I wanted to write an objective for today, I would say, Sarah, I want you to list 3 things that you learned. And so we're going to look at this and how it's different side by side. So an objective. Describe 3 characteristics of effective communication styles. So that's pretty basic, right? Okay, so I can list 3 things like interpersonal communication, our nonverbal, things of that nature, but taking it a step further to look at the outcome. So the outcome, at the end of this program, at least 90% of learners will report an increased knowledge or validated current best practice in completing documentation for continuing professional development contact hours. As you can see, the outcome is much more in depth. We're actually seeing what we're asking, and we're seeing the evaluation of what we're asking. And really, this takes it a whole step further and really provides the depth of the learning in which we are seeking. So let's go ahead and actually look at how to put it all together. So we have 2 examples that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the organizational sample, and then we're going to talk about a unit sample. So let's go all the way back to January 2020, and I know most of us probably don't want to think about all of that time, January 2020, and let's pretend like we're just learning about COVID for the first time. So the current state would be COVID-19 is a novel virus nurses do not have practice experience with. That's where we're at, right? That's what we're looking at. The desired state. So we want the nurses to know how to safely assess and provide care for our potential COVID-19 patients. So then we go to identifying the gap, like Sarah talked about. The nurses currently do not know self-care techniques or safe care, techniques for COVID-19 patients. So then our gap due to knowledge, skill, and practice, like Sarah spoke about, knowledge, nurses lack information about transmission, and the skill is donning and doffing PPE is ineffective. So we want our nurses to be safe, we want our patients to be safe, and we notice that there's that gap. So we're going to lean into the gap like Sarah talked about and identify, so we're going to discuss with our stakeholders. So stakeholders in this situation of an organization would be your nurses that are at the bedside, going to the Gemba, if you will, and getting a pulse on what's really going on. The nurse managers who are guiding and directing these nurses in the unprecedented time. And of course, infection preventionists, because we want an interdisciplinary approach so that we can best work with the staff and protect them and work on that gap. And observation. So we're going to go and we're going to see the observation of the ineffective donning and doffing. We're going to identify the points of weaknesses so that we can help make it better for our nurses. So our learning outcome will be nurses will have an 80% increase in knowledge and skill related to transmission of COVID-19 and donning and doffing of PPE. Okay, that's all well and good if we have learning objectives, we've identified our gap, we know what our current state is and our desired state, but essentially it means nothing if we don't evaluate, right? We need that data, we need to circle back, and we need to ensure that we're actually doing what we're set out to do. So our method of evaluation is nurses will pass a post-test with a score of 80% or greater with content focused on COVID-19 and safe and correct donning and doffing. So I think it truly helps me. I'm a visual person, right? So I need to see it, and seeing it laid out as such really does help, I think. So if we go to the next slide, which will have our unit-based sample, okay? So maybe you're not at the admin level, maybe you're not in the C-suite, and so you didn't really resonate with that organizational sample. And so let's talk about a unit sample. So current state, let's say you're working in the ED and you're getting new monitors. So brand X has been purchased for the ED. So that's really exciting because we know that Sarah can speak to this a little bit with her history of ED nursing. Can be a little rough on some of their equipment as they're saving lives and moving patients. And so getting new equipment, that's exciting, right? So our desired state is that we want the nurses to know how to set up and use the monitors accurately and safely. Seems simple enough, right? So our identified gap is nurses currently do not fully know how to use the new monitors. They know probably once they get in there and figure it out, but we need to identify the gap. So they don't quite know how to use it per the manufacturer's guidelines. So the knowledge gap is nurses have not been exposed to the new monitors. The skill gap is they don't know how to use them, and the practice gap is they've not used the new monitors on patients and in patient care. So methods to identify the gap. Majority of nurses in the ED have no experience with the new monitor because they're used to the old monitors that we had. Your learning outcome. Nurses will successfully demonstrate knowledge and use of new monitors by passing a post-test with a score of 80% or greater and successfully completing a skills checklist. And then the method of evaluation is the post-test. So we're going to evaluate the score, and then we're going to have the skills check off using the new monitor. So I think overall, if we look at the big picture and really breaking it down. And until you're comfortable with the process, and we know that many of you on this call from the beginning survey aren't quite comfortable, or you've never done this entire process from the beginning to the end, it really is important. If you feel comfortable, you can take this table that we have on this slide and just use it as your framework or your basis until you start to become more comfortable with identifying the gaps, developing your learning outcomes, figuring out what your current state is, etc., so that you can work and develop that high quality education. So our next thing, Megan, if you could help us, is going to be a poll about engagement. So sometimes, it's hard to engage our learners. So we want to get a pulse on how you engage your learners. So do you do interactive question and answer? And this is select all that applies. So whatever you feel most comfortable with. Self-check or reflection, simulation, case studies, or other. What do you do to engage your learners? Give it just another minute or so. Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Wow, 88% of you say that you use interactive question and answer, followed shortly by case studies, and then self-check or reflection. Awesome. Simulation, 50%. Other, I would be interested if you feel comfortable, if you want to maybe throw some of your other ideas into the questions feature so we can review that a little bit later. That would be wonderful. I think it's really important as we look at the different ways to provide education. It's really important that we are engaging the adult learner. So in the settings in which we all work, whether it's clinical, academia, it just all depends, but we need to be mindful of the engagement. And so using question and answer is great. Interactive question and answer, like we're doing polling, that's our way of interacting with you right now until we get to the questions portion, is a really great way to interact and get learner engagement. Also, the question and answer portion really does allow for your participants to feel like they matter. And I think that's really important because their voice is being heard. Self-check or reflection, I think, is also very important because sometimes we get into the weeds and we don't take a minute to reflect on ourselves. Maybe we have some implicit bias that we don't even realize is there, or we think we might know something because we learned it a long time ago and haven't addressed or come back to that knowledge and updated it as evidence has changed. Case studies is one of my personal favorites. When I worked in clinical education and the hospital setting, I utilized case studies a lot because it helped me understand where the nurses were coming from, and it helped me see gaps in their critical thinking skills and clinical reasoning. So case studies are a great way. And providing opportunities for problem-based learning. So make sure as we develop our education and we're looking to engage our learners that we have an opportunity and look for that opportunity for a formative assessment during the educational activity by providing the presenter with immediate learner feedback. So if a learner says, I don't quite understand, or I'm not getting this, or there's a gap that's presented, you can address that right away when you have immediate feedback. Other opportunities for learner engagement, simulation. Sarah mentioned simulation. And actually, I think there's such a beautiful way for us to be innovative in our situation right now where we are leaning heavily on the remote environment for us to do simulation in a different fashion. skill stations, when you're really trying to work on that practice gap, skill stations are great. Flipped classrooms. So a lot of times us as presenters or content experts or nurse planners, we come to the table and we want to check box A, B, and C. But with a flipped classroom, it's really important that we also allow for D, right? The portion that is from our learners, that what they want to learn in addition to A, B, and C. Polling is great. I love the instant feedback that we get with polling, and I love being able to see and interact with participants in that way. Games are always a fun way to keep people engaged, and then escape rooms. And here at Sigma, we've had escape rooms at our various events, and they are a great way to engage people, to help develop nursing leadership skills or a variety of different skills. So all of these things you have at your disposal and you have at your fingertips to really have a great learner engagement and a great educational activity. All right, so we went through a ton of information in a very short amount of time, right? So we're going to recheck where you're at. So we want to, and Megan, if you could pull up this poll again, we want you to rate your knowledge. So we had a large percentage when we first did this at the beginning of the presentation saying that you've never done it. But let's say the wording is a little bit different here. So I know it and I can do it with ease. I'm okay. I think I might struggle a bit with certain parts, or you've never done it, but you might try it now that you have this information, and we provided you with some great information here to make your education high quality. And Megan, whenever you see fit to give us the poll results, we'll give you guys a few minutes. Okay, all right. That's awesome. I really love seeing this because we want you to feel successful in the work that you do, right? And Megan, you could take the poll answer down. We want to provide information to help guide you along the way. So we appreciate your honest feedback. And I know Sarah and I are very open to connecting if you need anything in that regards. We want to go to the next slide, which is our references. So feel free to use these. If you're struggling with your gap analysis, this article here is great, or if you just need some extra course planning tips, the last article is excellent. And we definitely want to answer any questions that you have in regards to this process. I know we have some questions in the questions feature. So Megan, we have about 20 minutes to interact with you guys and answer your questions. So please feel free to use the questions feature and let us know what you need help with.
While you're thinking about your questions, I do want to point out a couple of just clarifying points about what Sigma provides versus what other organizations provide and what ANCC provides. So we didn't talk a lot about this. We wanted to really focus on the process, but I think it's just a point of clarification that Sigma is a provider unit. The other type is an approver unit. Some organizations are both. ANCC says that in order to be an approver, you have to be a specialty organization or a state board of nursing. Sigma, according to ANCC, does not qualify. We did try and go down that path, but ANCC said that we did not qualify. And so we are a provider unit, so we can offer education, but we cannot approve chapter-based education activities and things like that for education. So we can provide it, we can't approve it. The approver unit applications that you need to fill out in order to provide that education for your chapters, those can go through a state board of nursing. They can go through your specialty organization. Sometimes you'll get discounts depending on your state or your other organizations maybe that you're involved with, or you can go directly to ANCC. That works as well. Internationally, I did just want to make a quick note about that, is that their ANCC contact hours are accepted by many other countries, but every country does things just a little bit differently. And we certainly know a lot about them, but we don't know every single country, but we can help bridge the gap. And we're always wanting to learn as well what those additional qualifiers are, or how to fill out paperwork for the different ones. So it's certainly something that we are constantly, it's constantly evolving, but we can also help with other countries. If you're happen to be on this call and you're a chapter from a different country, certainly let us know that and how we can help you as well. So let's go to questions.
All right, so our first question is, can you speak to the definition of accredited provider? For example, is a school, hold on, I just lost it. Is a school of nursing considered to be an accredited provider? So this is what you were talking about, but.
So not automatically. You have to apply to ANCC or to another organization that can make you a provider. So it is not an automatic thing. Your school has to be a designated provider by ANCC standards. So it is not necessarily already a thing. But you could be, you could be if there's a nurse planner or as the, I'm going to butcher this new terminology, the accredited provider director, I believe is the new language. So it's even my title and I still don't know it yet. I'm still getting used to it. So, if you have one of those people that you would have to fill out a report annually, there are quite a few fees that are associated with that as well.
So related to this, can anyone besides ANCC or state board approve? Examples? Is there like a list somewhere?
There's not one solid list. ANCC does have some of that information that they will tell you. The specialty, or if it is a specialty nursing association, so for example, the Emergency Nurses Association or Critical Care, ANPD, Association of Nursing Professional Development, those are specialty organizations. So they all have approver units as well. What it costs you varies very greatly across the board. So definitely look into that, shop around a little bit before you make a decision on who you're going to work with, and know what you have to offer. I know I will just make a quick mention for Ohio Nurses Association. Certainly has done a really good job of making a really good process. I used to review for them as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah, for answering those questions. As I mentioned during the webinar, I'm relatively new to Sigma and its processes and ANCC, as before I was the approver provider through the Iowa State Board of Nursing. So the process is quite different with ANCC. So like Sarah said, it's all dependent on what you need and what you bring to the table as an organization. What other questions do we have, Megan?
So we have someone that is part of an organization that provides a service. Would it also count as a conflict of interest for this person to provide professional education on that service?
It depends on, is that service used on patients?
If the person wants to respond, I can let them know.
Yeah.
Desmond. Yes.
So if that service is used on patients, then yes, you have a conflict. That doesn't necessarily mean that you cannot offer, education on that particular topic necessarily. You just have to disclose that and make sure that your attendees know that you do have a conflict of interest. And then you could go through those 4 different types of resolution. And you do have to disclose that on your paperwork that's reviewed by a nurse planner, by whichever organization you're going with for that.
Okay. And can you speak more about how to resolve the conflict of interest? You said there's a form and...
Yeah, so depending on which organization you go with, so there was the 4 different actions that you can take. 1, remove that particular person or that particular topic. You could do that. Again, that's not the only option, but that is an option. You could revise the role. So if it's a person that's involved with the organization that happens to be on the planning committee, you could just revise the role so they didn't have influence over the different topic areas of education, or not award contact hours for that particular section. Or if you have somebody this review and make sure that they're not actively trying to sell that product or talk about just that product. You have to have a very wide view and share all of the data and information. It can't be biased in any way to promote one particular product over another. So you have to share the science.
Okay. A question about if a one-page traditional teaching learning plan is part of the submission for approval of a presentation.
Linda, do you want to take that one?
Sure. So I'm going to read it again out loud just for my own knowledge. Is a one-page traditional teaching learning plan part of submission for approval of a presentation? So I'm going to say kind of. And the reason why I say kind of, and Sarah, please correct me if I'm wrong, what you would need to submit for approval of a presentation is your different components. So we would want you, or, in general, you would have your learning outcome. So what you need, what you want your learners to know, basically going through that whole process that was outlined in the chart on in our presentation, I think would be sufficient. Now, granted, it doesn't have to look any certain way, right? So if you need it to use your learning plan as part of your submission for a presentation, that would be sufficient if it met all of the components. Sarah, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's the right answer, Linda, because you certainly could use that, but that's not a requirement. So if you're not currently doing that, you don't need to necessarily do that. It could be as simple as, your learning outcome, the title of the activity, what kind of interaction that you're going to have, with your learners during the activity, just to think through some things. So think of it more as like a planning table. In fact, the form actually says that for most organizations. There's a planning table, but it's really just answering a couple of different check boxes, like in the examples that we gave. So you could have it in a one-pager, and it could have all of that information present, but it doesn't have to be. If that's not answering that person's question, please submit something else in the chat box. We'd love to connect with you about it.
Okay, so thanks for this informative webinar. If one of the Sigma members is asking for a webinar like a simulation-based program or update, does Sigma provide certification for that, like, for example, an American Heart Association program?
So I think what the question is being asked is, Sigma cannot, is not an approver unit, and I think what you're getting into is more for an approver unit. However, there are a couple of, kind of seem as a little bit of a loophole that you could utilize. You could have a viewing party and then send everybody back to, and have a discussion about it. If you wanted to do more of a deep dive, you could view a webinar as a classroom, say, or as a chapter, and then have everybody come back and do the evaluation for that webinar. That would be acceptable. It is the honor system. We are trusting that you actually did what you said you did. This is an honor society, and we're all nurses, so we should be able to trust you in doing that. So I think, Linda, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I do think that if I'm interpreting the question correctly, I would agree with your response. I think just to coattail off of your last statement of us being an honor society and trusting our participants, if you do something like a watch party for a webinar, it goes back to the concept of integrity. So we trust and we lean on the fact that you have integrity as a nurse and as people that are viewing the webinars to fully complete the process and doing evaluations of the people that are present, etc. So if that, like Sarah said, if that didn't answer your question, please let us know. Megan, are there any other questions?
I'll add while Megan's looking at that. We often get asked, like, well, how do you know that people aren't just, lying and stuff besides that? But, it's not really any different than how we've done conferences for a long, long time. If you go to a nursing conference, there's not a police officer that walks you from, room to room and makes sure that you sit there through the whole thing and that you actually did it. That's not really how it happens. You say that you went to the conference, and then you fill out the evaluation form for the activities that you participated in. So it's not really different. I think just in the webinar setting, people, sometimes don't see the correlation between what it was in person. So it was the same thing in person. It's just now in webinar. So.
Yeah, we're just all in different locations. And I think, that's the beauty. We have a bigger reach now with webinars, right? That's the pretty cool component. I do want to remind everyone that, yes, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for you. So we got a couple of things in the questions asking about that. So since you are registered, you will receive an email in 1 week with the link to the Sigma repository for access for free. So don't fret about that. You will definitely have access to the PDF of the slides and also the recording.
And we do have a question about, does ANCC provide approval for each individual course, or do they accredit an organization as an ANCC provider?
Linda, you want to do that one? I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I think so. This is where I think it goes back to, Sarah explaining the difference between a provider and an accredited provider. And so we as Sigma are an accredited provider, so we can develop our courses, and if they meet all of the boxes, we can provide contact hours for it. So in regards to individual programs, so let's say that you, Susie Smith, would like to have your presentation to have contact hours. If you're not an approved provider, then your organization cannot give contact hours. Did I articulate that well, Sarah, or do you have something to clarify it a little better?
I would just add, so yeah, on the approver side, ANCC can make you a provider, or ANCC can make you an approver and a provider. So there are organizations like, I'm just going to pick Ohio Nurses Association, is both. So they can provide their own, and they can also approve yours. They kind of have two different groups that work on, they have staff that kind of work on making their own content. And then they have a group of reviewers that they train to look at other people's activities in their approver unit. So at the helm of it all, though, it's ANCC, and then they come down and do reviews for each of those different types of organizations. So they're still the parent organization, and then there's just lots of different ways of kind of splitting it up and doing it. So, again, hopefully that answers your question.
All right, so we do have a couple compliments that I wanted to provide you. I don't have a question, but I wanted to let you know how much I appreciate this presentation. I had absolutely no knowledge in this area. Every aspect of the presentation makes perfect sense now, and I feel confident in being able to plan and implement a continuing education activity. So good job,
Perfect.
guys. All right. So I think that's everything unless you guys had any closing things you wanted to say before I close it out.
I want to say one final thing. The best place to start, if you have questions about this, is to reach out to a particular organization. Look at the website. Everybody's got a website that has their information on it. You can pull the paperwork from. That will help you to get started. And you want to do that in the beginning, not at the end. You want to have that paperwork in mind as a guide to your planning process. So look up the paperwork with whatever organization you decide to go with. And again, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help and support you. We want you to have all of the resources that you need to be successful to plan your activities. So please let us know how we can help you.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. As mentioned, this webinar recording will be available on the Sigma repository within a few business days of the recording. And you will receive an email which will provide you with the information on how to obtain your continuing professional development certificate. Be sure to check out Sigma's upcoming webinars and resources to support you and your colleagues at sigmanursing.org. Also, previously recorded webinars and podcasts are freely available on the Sigma repository. So thank you, Sarah and Linda, for taking time today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thank you so much, everyone.